Where does joy live? Every now and then a dialogue takes place in heaven. It's the Bible that tells us about it, even if under the veil of the parable. In the Old Testament, and precisely in the book of Job, we hear how God looks proudly and affectionately at the creatures who are fond of him, while Satan, standing in front of him, asks, "Perhaps your creatures love you without interest? They love you because they receive everything from you, because they are filled with your gifts. But try to withdraw your hand, try to take away what they have. Let me wound them in their flesh and blood, and you will see how they will curse you." So Satan challenges God. Stretch out your hand a little and touch your creature in its bones and flesh, and you will see how he will curse you to your face. And God must accept the test. The Lord said to Satan, "Here is he in your hands. Just spare his life." Thus, misfortune, tormenting and irrational pain, atrocious and endless suffering are poured upon the earth and upon man. And many give in to Satan's blackmail and experience pain as a curse cast towards heaven, a rebellion that is sometimes violent, sometimes deaf and mute. In certain ages, then, the fear of pain becomes so insane, so inhuman, that one no longer even turns to God, but simply curses life, and men teach each other how to distinguish a worthy life from the unworthy one, and to destroy the one affected by pain and sorrow. The life that brings or can bring with it disgrace, one's own disgrace or others' disgrace, is destroyed even before it develops. Life that becomes bitter due to illness, old age, severe depression, or psychological condition surrenders to the social program of a false good death, and ends the curse, no longer aimed at God but at life, even loses its drama and becomes a matter of statistics and percentages, and a matter of law to be drafted in order to forget both God and the suffering that he did not want to impede. And Satan still seems to win the challenge even today, despite the fact that there was Christ, the beloved Son of God, whose soul was sad to death, and who sweated blood on our earth to show us that pain is part of the mystery of redemption. But many seem to have forgotten. Then God dedicates himself to rewriting the ancient book of Job and the newest account of the passion of his Son, because he wants to be blessed in the mystery of suffering. Then the miracle happens again, and Benedetta Bianchi Porro, a girl who died at the age of 27 from a devastating illness, represents this miracle for our time. What I'm about to tell you is the story of her life, and the title that best suits her incredible human experience is embedded in a simple question: where does joy live? Benedetta was attacked by a very rare and incurable disease, neurofibromatosis, which is the tumor of the nervous system, with a slow but inexorable progression, a tumor which attacks the nerve centers and removes all the windows with the outside. The auditory nerve is the first to be damaged, followed by the optic nerve, and then the other senses. Finally, there is a progressive paralysis. At one stage, then, the patient is forced to live in the prison of his own soul, but here's the singular fact. While the disease pruned all the branches of her life, Benedetta grew more and more in the experience of joy, to the point that one day she stated, How beautiful life is. It seems a miracle to me, and I would like to sing a hymn of praise to Him who has given it to me. This is a fact that makes us think, and that forces us to ask ourselves the question that will accompany us throughout our discovery of Benedetta's extraordinary life. Here is the question again: where does joy live? You see, in the news coverage it often happens to hear facts that certainly leave us very perplexed. The son of a very rich industrialist, who according to today's criteria should have felt the luckiest in the world, suddenly takes his own life. A famous actress who has reached the height of her career poisons herself to escape from the earthly scene. Or even managers who achieved a considerable success in their careers, just when everyone praises and admires them or even envies them, suddenly decide to commit suicide. And perhaps you too have personally known or heard of someone in your vicinity, a person maybe with a wonderful family who apparently lacked for nothing, who was young and good-looking, well-off, and even successful in his studies or in sports, with a whole life ahead of him still to live, and yet, in an inexplicable way, he or she decided to take his own life. Such facts must make us think, because they reveal to us that true joy follows ways that are very different from what people normally believe. What makes a person happy? So the question returns: where does joy live? Beware, if we look for it on the wrong path, we will never find it. We will only find illusions of joy that will burst like children's balloons at the first trial. I believe that these facts intrigue us because they take us by the hand and force us to dig deeper if we want to understand where the spring of joy is to be found. This is the question that emerges overwhelmingly when investigating Benedetta's human history. Here are the facts once again. We are in Italy in the 60s. In the summer of 1963, at the age of 26, Benedetta lies motionless in bed in the house of her parents. Try to imagine her. By now, the lower part of her body is completely paralyzed. She only moves her hands. She does not hear anything. Since February 28th, she is blind, suddenly blind. She has no smell. She can no longer taste anything. She only has sensitivity in her right hand, which miraculously will remain until the end. The right hand is the only tool of communication left for whoever wants to convey a message to her. Through this hand, the mother and her family members write the letters of the alphabet, and Benedetta understands and answers because she has kept the speech ability till the end, up to the last moment. Well, Benedetta is there in her bed in these conditions. Her mother is sitting beside her bed, leafing through the pages of a magazine. At one point she reads a letter from a reader to the editor of the magazine. This reader is a young man suffering from a severe malformation that forced him to walk rubbing the ground, and it's clear that being young, he felt all the weight and all the bitterness of his condition. Natalino, this was the young man's name, bewildered and without hope, was crying out for help. He wrote to the editor to seek a word of comfort, compassion, and also in some way to relieve his suffering. Benedetta's mother has an intuition. I want to read it to my daughter, and begins to transmit it by hand, one letter at a time. You can imagine how many hours it took to convey the content of the letter by composing the individual letters through Benedetta's hand. When Benedetta realizes the drama of that boy, she has a reaction that her mother didn't expect. She says to her mother, "Mom, I want to write to Natalino. Take the paper, take the pen, write." The mother would like to avoid this effort, so she asks, "But Benedetta, how do I do it? I don't have Natalino's address." Benedetta immediately replies with her lively spirit, "Mom, it's simple. Send it to the editor of the newspaper and he will deliver it to the young man." The mother then has no longer excuses and begins to write. This is the content of that letter. "Dear Natalino, in the weekly magazine a letter from you was published. Through my hand my mother read it to me. I am deaf and blind, so things become quite complicated for me." I stress this adverb, quite. Sometimes we only complain about trivial things, and in those conditions Benedetta says, "Things are quite complicated for me. I am, like you, 26 years old and have been ill for some time. A disease paralyzed me when I was about to crown my long years of study. I was graduating in medicine. I had only one exam left. I had been suffering from deafness for some time, but the doctors didn't believe me. The doctors thought it was a deafness from nervous causes, and they treated me with psychotherapy. And I went along not being believed and totally plunged in my studies that I desperately loved. I was 17 when I enrolled at university. Then the disease completely arrested me. When I had almost finished my studies, I had to pass only a final exam, the easiest one, and my almost degree served only the scope to diagnose my disease, because until then, nobody understood what I was suffering from. It was indeed she who discovered what dreadful illness had struck her. And one evening she informed her family, bringing a book of medicine. She simply said, "This is my disease. It's called neurofibromatosis, and this is the course of the disease." The letter continues. "Until 3 months ago, I could still see. Now it's night. Nevertheless, I am not desperate in my Calvary, because now I know that at the end of the road, Jesus is waiting for me, first in my armchair, now in this bed which is my home. I have found a wisdom greater than that of man. I have found that God exists, and His love, faithfulness, joy, certainty, to the end of the ages." If Benedetta says these things, it means she has experimented them. In those conditions one cannot cheat, one cannot deceive. So here comes the question: how did Benedetta manage to live this experience? And she concludes, "Soon I will be no more than a name, but my spirit will live on among those who suffer, and I will not have suffered in vain either." And you, Natalino, do not feel alone, never. Proceed peacefully along the path of time, and you will receive light and truth. My days are not easy. They are hard, but sweet, because Jesus is with me, with my suffering. He gives me sweetness in my lowliness and light in the darkness. He smiles at me and accepts my cooperation with Him. Goodbye, Natalino. Life is short. It passes quickly. Everything is a very short gangway, dangerous for those who eagerly want to enjoy themselves. And she concludes, I hug you, your sister in Christ, Benedetta. Natalino received this letter. Imagine the joy of this young man. He would never ever have imagined that a paralyzed girl like him, and in worse conditions than his, could have written him a letter of friendship and support. And Natalino replied. A correspondence began. In one of his last letters, Natalino wrote to Benedetta as follows: Dear Benedetta, as you know, I have not been able to get up from bed for 10 years now, but I am in high spirits, always, I swear, even when I'm sick. We mustn't regret if we see that roses have thorns, but we must console ourselves if we see that even thorns have roses. Encountered with Benedetta, Natalino too found himself overwhelmed with serenity. How is so much overabundant serenity possible? What and who is decisive in giving peace to the human heart? On 17th December 1963, about 1 month before her death, she writes to her friend Maria Grazia, I think I will almost certainly spend Christmas here in my bed, but I don't desire anything, only what God wills from me. I am fine, Maria Grazia, and God, who loves me, sends me so much comfort and so much love. I am fine. How could Benedetta be happy? How could she be satisfied and enjoy? There must be an answer. But let's go back to a story with the only desire to find an answer to the question that her incredible life poses to us. Where does joy live? Benedetta was born near Forlì, in northern Italy, on the 8th of August 1936. If she were still alive, she would now be as old as the Pope. At 3 months, she was struck by poliomyelitis, a fairly widespread disease among children in those years. Poliomyelitis left her with an impairment that made her suffer as soon as she entered life. She healed, but was left with a shorter leg that forced her to wear an orthopedic shoe all her life, since she was crippled. In spite of her impairment, life smiles to her. She's a brilliant student and earns outstanding grades at school. But then, in her teen years, the illness starts to give signs. At the beginning, an annoying deafness appears occasionally, which causes Benedetta so many humiliations. She often has to say, I didn't hear you. Can you repeat? For a girl, a great humiliation. She notes in her diary, I was questioned in Latin at school. Every now and then I didn't understand what the professor was asking me. What a bad impression should I give? But what does it matter? One day I will no longer understand anything that others say, but I will always hear the voice of my soul, and this is the true guide that I must follow. Meanwhile, the humiliations multiply, and Benedetta at the beginning feels the full weight of the discrimination. The mother recalls that one summer day they were sitting outside an ice cream bar. While they were eating their ice cream, a group of boys began to buzz around because Benedetta had a charming face. The boys noticed her and wanted to make friendship. The boys soon engaged in conversation with Benedetta, and she was so pleased about their attention. Then they invited her for a walk. She stood up, but when they saw she was limping, everyone moved away from her with an excuse. The mother recalls, Benedetta sat down again, and we realized how humiliated she was, because she started to understand that many roads were precluded to her. But life continues, and Benedetta plunged in her studies which she adored. At the age of 17, she received her high school diploma with honors. She then enrolled in the Faculty of Medicine in Milan. Her goal was to live, struggle, and sacrifice myself for all mankind. One day, in the summer of 1955, at the end of her second year, she showed up for a difficult exam at the Faculty of Anatomy. Without warning, the professor called on her for the oral exam. At first, she didn't respond. Then she blushed and shyly explained, "Professor, I am undergoing treatment for a disease of the nervous system. I can't hear anything. I hope to be healed. Please have patience with me. Could you ask me the question in writing?" The students in the room burst into laughing. Believing this to be a bad joke, the professor yelled, "Are you deaf? What is this? Who ever heard of a deaf doctor?" As he then threw her grade book against the wall, Benedetta stood up and went to collect the grade book from the floor, amid the laughs of her fellow students, which she could not perceive anyway. Then she returned to the professor's desk and said, "I beg your pardon. I didn't mean to offend you. Indeed am I deaf, but I do want to become a doctor, only to do good things." But the professor remained inflexible. Having failed the exam, Benedetta left the room. A friend who was there and witnessed the fact was crying out of pity for her. She asked Benedetta, "Benedetta, did you suffer a lot?" "I was there. You have been humiliated." Benedetta replies, "It does not mean anything. Listen, let's go home now, but please don't say anything to my mother for now. I will tell her tomorrow." Struggling with stoic determination against her handicap, Benedetta successfully pursued her studies. She learned to read lips. In oral exams, she answered questions in a flash, without letting on that she was deaf. In November 1955, she received permission to retake the oral exam from the summer before. This time, she was given the question in writing, and she passed with excellent grades. But that very evening, she got a migraine, and suddenly her field of vision narrowed. She immediately had a premonition. "Oh my God, not my eyes." Benedetta found herself more and more wounded on the path of sorrow. In a letter from the early 50s, she wrote a friend, and from that letter, we understand that Benedetta was tempted to despair. "Your words, so serene and calm, soothe the storm of my soul. I too want to take refuge in the quiet of a port, but my boat is fragile. My sails are ripped apart by thunder. My oars are broken, and the stream drags me away. I wish I could reach balance. I wish I could face the world with enthusiasm. I wish I could see that men are good and that things are beautiful. I wish, but I am afraid there is no happiness. I am afraid that everything is an illusion. I struggle and I struggle. It would seem that time slips away, instant by instant. Sometimes, when I feel my eyes filling with tears and the tears clog my throat, I do not know if it's the cold of the winter or the memories. You know, Anna, I feel like I am in a swamp and thinking more and more." These words reveal that Benedetta is perfectly aware of her situation of inexorable illness, and initially she panics and is in deep anguish because she cannot find arguments for peace. She is on the verge of despair, and this can be deduced from several of her writings. In another letter of that period she writes, "I am afraid of this darkness. I feel so useless, so empty. I desire the truth so much. I desire nothing but the truth, but nobody knows anything about it." Think what a bitterness. I desire the truth, but nobody knows anything about it. Benedetta is just at the beginning of her ordeal. She is staggering and afraid of falling into the void. Benedetta could have become one of the many desperate people in history. But suddenly something happens. Something big happens in Benedetta's life. Something that turns her situation upside down, that gives a new interpretation to her life. But where does Benedetta change? She changes inside, and changing inside, she reads everything in another way. When does this change happen? We don't know for sure. Benedetta didn't tell anything of this. She kept everything secret in her heart, though we realize that at a certain point Benedetta reads things differently. In one of her letters dated 1958, she wrote to a friend, "I think what a wonderful thing life is, even in its most terrible aspects, and my soul is filled with gratitude and love towards God for this." And writing to her mother, who had been away from home for a while, leaving her alone, she says, "Dear mother, as for me, I am as usual, but since when, and nobody knows when. Since when I know that there is who watches me fight. I try to make myself strong. How beautiful it is, Mom. I believe in love descended from heaven. I believe in Jesus Christ and his glorious cross. Yes, I believe in love. You will tell me, Mom, that I was born in Jesus. Yes, true, but before I felt him so far away. Now instead, I know that God is everywhere, even in sorrow. God does not abandon us. God is everywhere, even if we don't see him. Furthermore, the kingdom of God is within us." No one can deny that Benedetta's life there has been a reversal within her soul. Benedetta is now entering the boundless land of suffering, but her state of mind is a real escalation of joy and confident hope. Meanwhile, we follow her life. On 17th February 1955, she is admitted to hospital and undergoes a second operation on her foot, all useless. On 27 June 1957, she is hospitalized again and brain surgery is decided. On this occasion, Benedetta experiences a particular moment of female humiliation. She had beautiful long hair. They cut it all off. After the operation, when the effect of the anesthetic ends, Benedetta realizes that one cheek is completely stiff. She was almost a doctor, she understood. They injured the facial nerve. By now, half of her face is paralyzed. For a girl, it's terrible. The surgeon did not know how to ask her forgiveness for his professional error. He is dismayed, but she simply told him, "Doctor, you did what you could do. Take my hand and be at peace. It was something that could happen. You are not the eternal Father, so do not worry." Benedetta was like that. She worried about others and forgot about herself. This aspect of her character impressed and left everyone moved and thoughtful. Yet the great moral strength she demonstrated was no longer enough for Benedetta to endure her situation. One day she wrote to her best friend, Maria Grazia, and from her 7th-floor apartment in Milan. "There are times when I would like to throw myself out of the window." However, she would not concede defeat to the disease. At the cost of tremendous effort, she successfully completed her 5th year of medical school in June 1959. She was only 1 year away from her degree, but soon an operation intended to stop the progressive paralysis of her lower limbs ended in failure. She was no longer able to walk at all. In 1960, she was forced to completely give up her studies, a difficult trial for this young woman so gifted and eager to be active. But while her loved ones helplessly watched her progressive physical destruction, they were also the stunned witnesses to her spiritual growth. Yet things did not always go smoothly. Peace was followed by periods of interior agony. In 1960, Benedetta wrote to a new friend named Nicoletta. "At the moment, I am going through a period of great aridity. I feel alone, tired, somewhat humiliated, and without much patience. The worst is that I am not at peace. Pray for me, pray for me. Why is this happening to me? Why is God allowing this?" Her friend answered, "Do not force yourself to feel what you believe or to understand why it is fair that you suffer so much. Don't panic if you seem to be rebelling. This is not important in God's eyes. He knows the truth. Before this vast mystery, He wants only our yes. It does not matter if we say it badly." Benedetta listened and said her yes. And little by little, she experienced the presence of Jesus Christ living in her. She was able to write back to Nicoletta, "Blessed you for the joy you have obtained for me, a joy too great for me, so unworthy. I was flooded with joy, as though all the oceans were poured into a shell." From this time on, Benedetta considered suffering less as a burden to be heroically carried than as the mark of divine favor. Jesus called her to share His cross so that she might identify herself with Him. She let herself go and found her strength in the Gospel, which she read every day in St. Paul and in the Psalms. On the 1st of January 1962, the mother said to Benedetta, "You know, Benedetta, the pilgrimage to Lourdes is scheduled for the month of May. The doctors allowed you to participate. Are you happy?" It was January. Benedetta lived those few months in expectation for the pilgrimage. They left on May 24th. And in a short time, the news of this seriously ill and incredibly at peace student spread on the special train which was outfitted for the transport of disabled patients. Everyone wanted to meet her, and Benedetta was amazed. At the hospital, in the bed next to hers, was a 22-year-old woman, Maria, paralyzed after an accident. She was an only child and had left her mother paralyzed too at all. Maria had come to Lourdes to ask the Immaculate Conception for the miracle of her recovery at least, in order to be able to assist her old mother. The days went by in prayer, but the miracle did not happen. On the last day, they are there, lying on their stretchers side by side in front of the grotto in prayer. Maria is sobbing out of despair and disappointment. Benedetta, who could still see at that time, realizes it. She reaches out, takes the girl's hand and says to her, "Do not be afraid, have faith. Let us pray Our Lady. Let us pray her together so that you get well." Maria is puzzled. Through Benedetta's mother, she asks why they have to pray for her alone and not for both. Benedetta replies, "Because at least I have my mother who takes care of me, whereas you are alone." So they pray together. A few minutes go by, and suddenly Maria lets go of Benedetta's hand. She jumps up from the stretcher. She gently takes a few steps, still incredulous, and starts shouting, "I am walking, I healed." And then, delirious with joy, she makes her way among the wheelchairs, weeping with emotion and gratitude. Astonishment and euphoria seize everyone. All run after the girl and cry out for the miracle. Benedetta and her mother remain there, alone in the midst of everyone's joy. The mother, of course, looked at her daughter and realized that nothing had changed for her. So she is tempted to complain towards God and tells Benedetta off. "Benedetta, how silly of you! You could have asked for a miracle for yourself." Benedetta looks at her and says, "Mom, I did not ask to be healed. The miracle for me is this. I understood the preciousness of my condition and I only desire to preserve it." At the beginning of 1963, Benedetta's eyesight deteriorates further. So a new head surgery is attempted. The operation seems to have gone well, but complications arise, and therefore a follow-up operation is decided in February, but this time the intervention fails. On 28 February 1963, Benedetta becomes completely and irreparably blind. She had just turned 26. At one point, the sister sees her eyes filling with blood. Benedetta gets agitated, but who could communicate with her? She was already deaf, now also blind. Who could talk to her? Who could handle her pain if words could no longer reach her? From that point on, for nearly a year, Benedetta was like an inaccessible castle, with neither doors nor windows. Nevertheless, two little peepholes remained open to the outside world. A weak voice to make herself heard, and her right hand, which miraculously remained functional. With the fingers of this functioning hand, her loved ones traced on her face the letters of the Italian alphabet for the deaf, which she could not see but could feel. She could thus communicate. On June 1st, 1963, she wrote her friend Maria Grazia, "Jesus is here. He smiles at me. He precedes me. He encourages me to bring him some crumbs of love." To a seriously ill young man named Umberto, Benedetta sends this message. "Dear Umberto, I would like you to find some of that peace that I possess. Don't worry. Don't ask yourself where God is. Don't look for God far away, because God is close to you and suffers with you. He is in your heart, so you simply love Him with humility." On another occasion, she entrusted this surprising confidence to her childhood friend, "Dear Hannah, thank you for your postcard and for your greetings. I too have not forgotten about you, but now I have changed a lot. Now I know that there is God, and I am fine. Oh, how fine I am. Her room was besieged by visitors who came to encourage her, but also to ask for help. Benedetta gave advice and showed everyone the narrow door that leads to God. Through word of mouth, there was a continuous flow of friends and friends of friends, and they were all amazed to witness how anybody who visited her to bring her consolation, encouragement, and sympathy left her room with the heart full of peace and serenity. Everybody who came to bring gifts departed from her having received instead spiritual gifts, because Benedetta spread joy. 22nd January 1964, second last day of Benedetta's life. In the early afternoon, a slight fever assails her, which gets worse towards evening. Benedetta talks, but her mother is unable to understand her. By now, Benedetta is already on the threshold of heaven. Evening comes, and after dinner, her mother lingers in front of the television and recalls what she was watching that evening, a singing contest. Benedetta suddenly raises her hand and rings the bell. Very rarely had she rang the bell to call her mom, because she knew that her mom had so many things to do around the house, and she was very respectful. But that night she rings the bell. The mother is surprised, runs into the room and asks, "What do you want, Benedetta? Do you need anything?" Benedetta reassures her mother and says, "No, mother." Then she's silent for a few moments and is almost embarrassed to ask something. But her mother insists, asking her through her hand, "What do you want?" Then Benedetta, almost whispering, exclaims, "Mom, I ask you for a favor. I would like you to kneel beside me to thank the Lord for everything He has given me." The mother looks at her daughter in dismay. She's there, paralyzed and deformed, deaf and blind, with dull eyes and motionless hands. The mother has a moment of rebellion and communicates to her daughter through her right hand, "No, I can't do this. I don't have your generosity." Benedetta doesn't have the courage to react, but a surprising thing happens. Over the time, the illness had totally paralyzed the muscles of her eyes, thus taking away the possibility of crying. Yet, after her mother's words, the mother saw 2 tears in Benedetta's eyes flowing down her cheeks, while she begged, "Please, Mom." And she says this with mournful humility, as if she was asking for a caress. The mother then feels deeply ashamed and miserable. So she kneels down crying. She has recalled this episode several times. She puts her face in Benedetta's right hand and fills her hand with tears and finally says, "Yes, I do it for you. I too thank the Lord for what He has given you." And she recited the Magnificat, kneeling down beside her daughter. After Benedetta's death, she stated, "I am Benedetta's mother, but in some respect I am Benedetta's daughter. Because my daughter taught me to live, she taught me to believe, she taught me to love." The morning of January 23rd, 1964 comes. It's the last day, the last hours. Suddenly, the mother looks out into the garden and her attention is drawn by something white. She can't see well from the distance and cannot figure out what it is. She thinks it might be a handkerchief dropped by the pupils who ran past their garden in the morning on their way to school. However, she goes out to find out. In the middle of January, a white rose blossomed in the garden. She returns to the house, runs into Benedetta's room to bring her the unusual news. Through the hand, Benedetta promptly replies, "Mom, I dreamt of that rose. It's a sweet sign. Pick it later." Benedetta raises her hand and greets, thanking everyone. Then her hand falls back onto the bed and she closes her eyes forever. Roberto, a young man met in the hospital during a blindness, announces a few hours later Benedetta's death with these words: "Benedetta ascended to the Lord at the age of 27. No one will be able to take away her youth, and the youth she gave to those who knew her. Benedetta remained young at heart. How many healthy people are instead old at 20? Benedetta has remained young." Benedetta never achieved her medicine degree, but today, from heaven, she teaches countless patients the art of entrusting suffering into Jesus' hands. Mother Teresa once said, "It's clear that considering the many cases of suicide committed by people who have success and wealth, the whole system of signs directing to joy should be reviewed." Benedetta, answer our question. Where does joy live? You know it. Please remind us.